My name is John Lee, your FCA International Director of Operations. Thank you and welcome to FCA International's September safety call. Hope everyone had a safe and productive summer. We are back to live calls now, and they take place the fourth Tuesday of every non-summer month. The purpose of these calls is to inform and work to create a community of safety professionals for the signatory finishing trades. Since we last talked, OSHA published its proposed heat injury and illness prevention and indoor work settings rule that came out in the Federal Register on August 30th. The rule is now open for public comments through the end of December, and before it is set to be finalized and published. The rule will require employers to develop a heat, injury, and illness prevention plan and implement control measures, provide training, and maintain detailed records. In preparation of this, FCA has developed a template heat stress program that is included in your FCA membership, which is compliant with this standard. And to request your template, just go to FCA's website or email us at safetyhelpline@finishingcontractors.org. It is our pleasure to welcome back Mike Hartnett, our esteemed safety professional consultant for another year. We're thrilled to have him here. Mike's got experience in the trades with the IUPAT. So he's just been a fantastic fit for us and been with us for a few years now. So just thanks, Mike. Thanks for being here, and take it away.
Thank you, John. And yeah, I spent 15 years with IUPAT, so it's really within my interest to keep everybody paying into my pension. I'm going to need that someday, I hope, right? It does give me a good perspective for what your membership is dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I always try to take that and tailor it to specifically the finishing trades for you. And today we're going to be talking about respiratory protection, which is something that's really important, near and dear to my heart. All right, so we'll start off same place as always with the FCA Safety Helpline. If you have any safety-related questions, you can call, you can email, you get your questions answered. They're private, and I respond pretty quickly to it. Right? I also have a lot of resources outside of just myself within my organization. So you really can get a good answer and quickly when you reach out to the FCA Safety Helpline. Right. So we're going to talk about respiratory protection. And one of the things that's required for respiratory protection is a good respiratory protection plan. And we have one already well-defined within your safety manual. And we're going to talk a lot about what those are, right? What is inside that program. It's a little bit dense, but we can get through it, right? So the outline is going to have your responsibilities. How do we evaluate hazards for determining which type of cartridges we need to utilize, right? How do we select respirators, or what selection do we need to have available? We're going to talk about the ins and outs of fit testing, the ins and outs of medical evaluation, as well as going into that record keeping side. And then we'll finish it up with some miscellaneous, a couple of slides that I have that I think are worth bringing to your attention if you're not aware of, or maybe we can bring you a tool that you have not thought of before. All right, so responsibilities. Responsibilities are going to begin on the front line, right? And with your foreman. That is generally where the buck stops with most things. And if your foreman is aligned with your respiratory protection program, then he knows he has a couple jobs, or they know they have a couple jobs. Do they have those handy wipes, right? Do they have something for cleaning masks? Now, having a sink with soap and water is not always reasonable when we're talking about the finishing trades. When we can get it, we should use it. But if we do not have that soap and water, then wipes are a good option. 3M has nice disposable single-use ones that are available, but you don't need to use those either. You can go ahead and get a tub. And then storage. Right? Storage is very important with respirators. We run into this a lot in the manufacturing side where OSHA sees a respirator or a dust mask laying on the floor or hanging, and they'll write a citation for improper storage. If we're not utilizing the mask, it needs to be in an airtight container, right? So Ziploc bags generally do it most of the time. We need to make sure we have those available for our people, right? I know it's their responsibility to maintain it once they have it, but we're the ones that are going to end up with citations if they aren't cared for properly. We're the ones that are going to have to deal with the concerns from health issues, right? Because our OSHA recordables are not only incidents, they're also illnesses. And respiration is one of the easiest ways to get chemicals into the body, right? One of the most abusive ways. So we want to make sure that we're protecting them. The foreman also has to make sure that they're using them correctly, right? These are all responsibilities we lay out there. From there, we move on to the program administrator. All right, so within your manual, it clearly states that you need to have a program administrator and define who that program administrator is. That program administrator has a lot of requirements that fall on it. Now, all of this, once again, is in the manual that FCA has created in the respiratory protection program. I believe it's chapter 28. But we'll go over them piece by piece, right? Starting with identifying work areas, we know when we're in the finishing trades that it's the tasks that we're going to be utilizing that requires masks are pretty much nonstop, right? We have them most days. So really what it comes down to is evaluating hazards, right? We need to make sure that there we go. Make sure that we evaluate those hazards. If it has an asterisk next to it and blows up, that's because we're going to talk about that later in this presentation. Next is the selection of respiratory options. That is something we will come back to. So monitoring respiratory use to ensure that your workers are utilizing it correctly. If your program administrator is somebody who never leaves the office, they're probably not the right person, right? Or if they do, then they should be periodically making the effort to go out and observe how the respirators are being used, right? Looking for simple clues like, are your people clean shaven, right? Are respirator cartridges being changed out regularly? How often are they being changed out? Those are type things that you really need to make sure you're aware of. Make sure that those respirators are being used as they're supposed to in the environments that they're supposed to. Also, proper storage and maintenance, right? So that program administrator needs to be going out to the site periodically to look at those respirators, how they're being stored, asking the workers how they think the respiratory program is working. All right. Next, we need to arrange and or conduct training, right? Annual training is a requirement when it comes to respiratory protection, as is a fit test, right? Either qualitative or quantitative, we require a fit test annually. And it is that program administrator who's responsible to make sure all of their people are fulfilling that. They also have to administer the medical surveillance program because before we get that fit test, we need to make sure that the person is healthy enough to wear a respirator. Respirator, breathing through a negative pressure respirator does add burden to the cardiovascular system, right? So it is definitely possible for somebody's health to be at a point where that added burden is dangerous for them. And that's why we require going through, filling out that medical questionnaire and bringing it to a doctor or a professional licensed healthcare professional. We also have to maintain those records, right? And they're often medical records, so we'll go into that a little bit later. Evaluating the program, if you are going out periodically to check and make sure that the respirators are being used correctly, that they're being stored correctly, that will allow you to evaluate that program, right? And if you have big changes in your equipment, right, we get another job that's actually going to require a supplied air respirator when we've never used that in the past, and now we're going to have to do training on it and all of that. We need to update our program so it includes those types of respirators if it doesn't already, right? Make sure our respirator program reflects what is being done out in the workplace. All right, so how do we evaluate those hazards? One of the best ways to evaluate hazards when you get a new material in is to look at the SDS, right? Section 8 of your safety data sheet will tell you the controls that you're supposed to be using and the personal protection, right? We're talking about respirators here. So we're talking about the respiratory protection on the bottom is what we're looking at. But Section 8 has more than just that. It has the chemical makeup and what the PELs are for it, as well as what engineering and administrative controls you should be putting in place, as well as using PPE. So if you have a new product, this specifically is for Sherwin-Williams dry fall. I don't know what sheen, but it's their latex dry fall. Right. So if we haven't used this product before and it comes across on a bid, we're going to need to utilize XYZ product. We haven't dealt with it before. Let's go ahead and look at the respiratory protection. Now, respiratory protection down here, this is from Sherwin, and they give you a straightforward CYA answer, right? They cover their butts by saying, hey, there's potential for exposure. Make sure you do everything you're supposed to be doing to protect from that exposure. Right. Not very helpful. I agree. Sometimes, but this is manageable from Sherwin-Williams. Sometimes you'll get a respiratory protection that says, supplied air only. I've seen it on materials that only had irritants, right? It was nothing that would require a air supplied hood, but the company just wanted to CYA, make sure they never got in any trouble. So those are a little bit more frustrating. Oftentimes, this will tell you what you should be using. But if it doesn't, then you're really going to have to go to the rest of Section 8, right? Where you have all this technical information. And although you may understand most of it or have a really good grasp on what the majority of this means, you better be really sure you know what this means when determining what, which cartridge is best for filtering. I can remember when I was in the field a long and long ago, we were doing a big data center, right? And there was a trench in that data center feeding all the backup generators or something. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but this trench got a 3-part epoxy. And I had asked, I was an apprentice, so I asked good questions that everyone said was stupid. I asked, well, what type of respirator do we need for this? It's a 3-part epoxy. I mean, that seems pretty intense. And the foreman told me not to worry about it. We had everything we needed. So one night I go there because the foreman wasn't a part of it. And there were 2 apprentices with me. 5 minutes into working with this material, wearing our respirators, I start doing the bass line to Anagata Devita, and the guy working with me starts belting out the lyrics. We were clearly stoned out of our minds, right? So we exited the building, ended up having to sit there for the rest of the shift trying to recover from that, right? That is a terrible situation to put people into. We want to make sure we know. So the way we do that, if it does not clearly specify on the SDS what cartridges should be used, get a hold of a certified industrial hygienist. A certified industrial hygienist could look at this and give you an answer in minutes. If you build a relationship with a industrial hygienist, and they are everywhere, build a relationship with an industrial hygienist where you're going to send them SDSs periodically and they'll tell you what is the right respiratory protection from, and you'll end up without much of an expense at all. And yet we will know that when our products that we know our people are working with day in and day out. And I don't know how many decks I sprayed over 15 years, but it was a lot. Right. And, what do we have here? Carcinogen and attacking repeated exposure, many different organs. Right. This is not something that we want to leave to chance. We want to make sure that we have the right cartridge, the right protection for our people. Right? Okay, so let's go on to the next responsibility of the program administrator. Selection of respirators. Right? We're required to have different respirator options, different sizes and different makes. Different face sizes work better with some are more comfortable than others, right? And some have different protection factors than others. If we look at a half mask negative pressure respirator, right? That's number one, which would be air purifying respirator. That's people powered. You just breathe through it. A half mask has a protection factor of 10, right? So 10 times the PEL is what it's good for. A full face is good for 50 times the PEL. And from there, we move to other ones that are much less likely to be used, although many of you may be, if you're in the industrial area, you may very well be using those supplied air respirators, right? And then when we use those, we have to make sure that we're looking for not only the medical fitness of the person, but the medical fitness of the person, including how much extra weight and how much force they need pushing through that supplied air, so they get enough air for their heightened activity, right? So when we're really humping, we need to make sure we got enough oxygen coming in, enough purified air, I should say, coming in. All right, so let's move on to that fit test. Fit test is required annually, right? Anytime you have a tight fitting respirator. So let's back up just a second. Your quarter mask, half mask, and full face mask, those are all tight fitting respirators. Your helmet hood is usually a tight fitting respirator. It would say loose fitting if it wasn't. So a loose fitting face piece does not need a fit test, right? Fit tests are for tight fitting respirators, respirators that require a seal. Your loose fitting face piece requires positive air pressure pushing out, which would give that level of protection. All right, so there's two different types of fit tests that can be performed. The first one is the most common, and it's qualitative, right? Use the irritant smoke, follow the procedure, and the person tells you whether they smell it or whether they don't smell it, whether they cough. This is an acceptable method. It is not the most effective. You can have people that are, a very small percentage of people, but some people are not impacted by that irritant smoke. Others will try to cover because they don't want to go through this again or have to shave or get a different mask or whatever. So the qualitative is good but flawed, right? The quantitative is more specific, right? It is more trustable because it's testing not only whether or not the person subjectively feels they're being exposed, it measures the exposure. So if we're going to use that quantitative fit test, that takes specialized equipment and specialized training on that equipment so that they know how to use it and measure it correctly. Right, so the protocols are going to be the same. The procedures will be a little bit different. The only time you are required to use quantitative is if you're going to be exposing your people to over 10 times the PEL, right? The permissible exposure limit for any chemical. At that point in time, you require that quantitative fit test. And quantitative fit tests are a better test, right? Best practice would be to use a quantitative fit test all the time, but it is not required. Now, the fit test procedures, the steps, everything that needs to be done are in the manual. Note down here, facial hair, right? We're not allowed to have facial hair on the seal during a fit test, right? So make sure that we're clean shaven for the fit test and when we're out there painting. You can have one of those little stashes that don't get to your outside of your lips. You can get a little soul patch that doesn't go to the bottom of your chin, but that's about it. If you look at the manual that you have, you'll see we have highlighted here in the appendix. There's a lot of extra forms in this specific chapter, probably the form heaviest chapter in the entire manual. Respirator fit test and training record, right? It's very important that we document those fit tests. The rainbow passage is the passage that OSHA requires the participant taking the fit test to read to show that they can move their mouth and talk in order to pass that fit test. And then that last one is a fit test procedure that walks through step by step what you need to do for that fit test. Right, so it's all clearly defined within here what that fit test is. We have to repeat that fit test if there are major changes, right? If somebody has some major dental surgery or loses a lot of weight or something else that changes the shape of their face, then we should fit test again, right? Or if we have people that are complaining that the respirator isn't protecting them anymore, that's a good time to do a fit test as well. Okay, medical evaluations. It is required before we send anybody for a fit test or before we perform a fit test on anyone that we make sure our people fill out that medical evaluation questionnaire and that we provide that questionnaire to a healthcare professional, a licensed healthcare professional. They will determine whether or not this person is fit to wear a respirator or needs to come in for more of a physical, right? In-person assessment of their capabilities. Now, anybody that answers yes to any of the questions on 1 through 8 is going to trigger that physical exam. And these are not uncommon issues. If you have ever had pneumonia, you qualify for needing to go in for a physical for it, right? If you have high blood pressure, diabetes, other pretty common things will trigger a visit to the doctor to make sure that they have the health required for wearing this respirator. Right? So what we're going to do is provide them with the questionnaire. We're going to make sure they fill it out, and then they turn that into the licensed healthcare professional. They're going to do the assessment and get back to you. What if the person refuses? They don't want that physical, or they don't want to answer the respiratory evaluation questionnaire? That's okay. They just are never allowed to work in any environment that would require a respirator, right? Oftentimes in the finishing trades, that is a insurmountable hurdle, but we cannot force them to fill out this medical information. So when we do have when we are doing that medical evaluation, there are certain things we need to send to the doctor, right? A licensed healthcare professional or a doctor needs to go through this. They need to have many of the forms that we have in the back of this manual. Right? So if we look at it, we have a document that tells us how to administer that medical evaluation questionnaire, right? Because it's a medical document, so it's important we know the ins and outs. The evaluation information that you're going to need to provide, that questionnaire, both in English and Spanish, right? Then we have a mandatory provision to the healthcare professional. We need to give them the information they need to know before filling this out. Medical surveillance documentation for that doctor to fill out when they're doing it, and then the reports that we will send out later. One, they will send to us. That's medical surveillance documentation, written medical report for employer, right? Because we do not get the results of the physical, right? We get a determination that they are healthy enough to wear that respirator or they are not. That is all we will get is their medical opinion, healthy enough, not healthy enough. And the employee themselves will get more information, but that's not our information. What we do with that information is kind of important. The program administrator is required to keep that written recommendation. He is healthy enough, he is not healthy enough, right? That the licensed healthcare professional provided. We need to keep that documents for 30 years. That's pretty important. The fit test documentation we needed to keep until the next test, but I have an asterisk there, and that's for a good reason. If an employee was involved in an incident where there was an injury, and we think that there's any possibility that there will be litigation related to that, at that point in time, you should always capture all of the training files of that employee at that point in time. Because the fit test documentation, like many other certifications, we only keep the most recent. And if for some reason we need to show that they did have a fit test at that point in time, we no longer can if we only have the most recent and more than a year has passed. Right. So we don't need to keep everybody's for more than a year. You're only required to keep a fit test until the next test is taken. But if you have somebody involved in an injury where you feel there might be some type of workers' compensation suit or some other suit, you're going to want to make sure you get those training records to the side and those fit test records to the side. So both fit test and training documentation need to be done annually and kept until the next training. The licensed healthcare professional is in charge of keeping the medical questionnaire, the results of the medical tests, examinations, diagnosis, all that stuff they have to keep for 30 years. You do not have access to that, though you are responsible to make sure that they have that available. So if for some reason that medical office goes out of business, you have a certain amount of time of which to get those medical records and provide them to another safekeeper of that information. And so this is a relationship that you're going to need to be aware of and keep on top of if you are going to be providing these fit tests. Now, how many of you have the fit tests being performed by the union itself, the district council? I remember when I was apprentice, the district council always put us through our fit tests, and my employer never worried about it. Is that something that you find? All right, so Mike says that we do our own, and that should be the right answer. right? The program that we've written assumes that you do your own, right? That's why the program administrator has all of these responsibilities. We need to make sure that we are in control of those, or we're getting the proper information from the union as well, right? I would suggest that we not just get a fit test card, but ask for the written recommendation, the fit test documentation, and the training documentation. Right? If we can get that, then we're in pretty good shape. Okay, so now we have some miscellaneous things. Cartridge replacement. We have a couple of different choices when it comes to cartridge replacement. We can either utilize a cartridge that has an end-of-life service indicator, or we can have a scheduled replacement. If we have a scheduled replacement, you need to know who's enforcing it, and you should document it. Okay. Have everybody sign off when they trade in their, or when they get new cartridges, and make sure that we're getting those done on that schedule. If you do not have a schedule, right, you can spend, and I believe it's only like $3 more a cartridge for the 3M instead of a 6,000 series, which I imagine, I know that's what I used a lot of, is a 6,000 series. 6,000i, right, is one that has this indicator and tells you how much of the service life you've used of that respirator. Okay, so very valuable tool instead of just guessing, right? We have people, well, change it when you can smell it, is what I was always told, right? But I'll tell you now, my nose doesn't work all that well anymore. Right? Does it have to do with, who knows? A lot of it has to do with COVID though, because that made it go really far away. But these, having a service life indicator and making sure that you've talked to your employees about it and they understand it, going out and doing spot checks, or having your foreman do spot checks on these indicators, if you are utilizing them, is essential, because we want to make sure that people have access and are using them correctly, right? And then the last thing I really wanted to cover and make sure that I made you aware of is the PAPR, right? These things are expensive, right? As are their cartridges, right? The cartridge is probably about 10 times the cost of a normal set of cartridges. If we have employees that can no longer pass the physical exam to wear a regular respirator, we can utilize this. A PAPR can be very helpful in those situations, right? It doesn't require the person's own breath to pull through the filter. It has a battery pack that pulls the air and blows it up into the mask. Right? And this can really be helpful. They has it in a tight fitting and in a loose fitting configuration. And by providing that PAPR, we lift the burden off the person of having to pull that air through the filter. So when we have people that are suffering from past exposures or are just aging, as we do have an aging workforce, this may be something we can utilize to help extend when we need to. Right? So this also helps in situations if you run into somebody with say a religious requirement not to shave, right? Can't be clean shaven, that's okay. We can go with a loose fitting PAPR and take care of that as well without having to worry about what our liabilities are and what trouble we're going to get into. All right, so PAPRs are a good, powered air purifying respirator is what it stands for, PAPR. So a powered air purifying respirator can be a valuable tool, especially with an aging workforce.
Mike, thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you back next month. Thank you all, and have a fantastic rest of your week.